Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for coming back to Listening In, the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society podcast. In this series, we want to provide the opportunity for you to listen in to some of the conversations that I'm lucky enough to have every day. That is, with a variety of people and organisations all working in the field of mental health and well-being. In this episode, we are joined by Elaine Bousfield MBE, who has taken her own counselling background and entrepreneurial bent into the world of literature and its use in therapy. Elaine is founder and CEO of Zuntold, which is a therapeutic service offering bibliotherapy, as well as a publishing company. Elaine reflects, "I think there's something about finding it difficult to see people suffer in the same old ways and nothing changing. Let's do something about that." And so with a large amount of tenacity and a small loan, which as far as the building society were concerned was for a new kitchen, she began building a platform that we now know as Kooth. Always trying to find ways of making therapy more accessible, especially to young people, Elaine says, "It's about not accepting poverty, not accepting inequality, not accepting some things are just rubbish and unfair and unjust. I just can't accept that." And so, after moving on from Kooth, Elaine began to write a new role for herself, and the story of Zuntold began. As we've sort of said in some of the emails we exchange, I think it's always really nice for people to understand perhaps what somebody's backstory is. Because I think, again, as practitioners, so many of us know that there are reasons why we go into the work we do, and how that work then evolves, the paths we take, the directions we choose, and where that comes from. So for you personally, Elaine, what is your background that took you in or brought you into this world of therapy, at some point in your adult life?
Gosh, that's a really big question, isn't it? It's what's the proverb, never judge a tree until you understand the winds that shaped it or something, which is, yeah, oh gosh, it's a big question. And of course, it's funny because the more you learn and the more you reflect upon your life and as you grow and you look back, the story changes. It's a bit like looking at the past is a bit like looking through a kaleidoscope, I think. The pattern's forever changing,
Your perspective's always changing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So I suppose, so I guess the two big catalysts for me, I suppose, was growing up in a family where I was a lovely family in many ways, where I felt very loved. I was very lucky to have that experience because not everybody does. And as we know, it is probably the most important experience to have in terms of attachment and in terms of feeling secure. I was very lucky I had that. But my parents were struggled in their relationship with each other. And I found out the reason why for that much later in my 50s. I finally understood why that was, but it was a mystery to me growing up. And my sister and father didn't always see eye to eye. So family life was kind of, it had its dynamics, I suppose, some of which were kind of quite problematic. And I was a very... I was very emotionally attuned as a child, and I think as an adult I still am, but I think I was naturally very emotionally attuned. So I was forever puzzling. I was forever trying to sort my parents out. I was forever trying to sort them out, get them talking, make them happy, And of course you can't, as children can't do that. But I tried. As the eldest child, I fell into that role quite a lot. And then the other thing I did was I studied sociology at A level, and I think that completely changed me in that I began to understand some of the big socio-economic influences that shape people's lives. So I grew a kind of like a political awareness, I suppose, through studying sociology. And I decided I wanted to be, and I also at 13, and I'm not this anymore, but between the ages of 13 and 16, I became a born again Christian. and I think that kind of also kind of fed my thinking about wanting to do something worthwhile with my life. So I decided I would be a probation officer or a social worker. So I plodded off to university, and I ditched Christianity at the age of 17. It was the supernatural elements of the religion that no longer made sense to me, really. But I guess some of the principles and some of the kind of morals were very, some of the kind of compassion, was fitted still. So I went off and I did a social science degree, was absolutely dreadful at it. I should have done an English degree because I'm really rubbish at statistics and economics, and my brain doesn't work very well for those sorts of things, really. But it did teach me how to read social policy papers. It did teach me, it was a really good grounding academically, I suppose. And then while I was there, I worked as a volunteer with the probation service, decided, no, I don't want to do this. I want to do something preventative. So I left university, went to work in homelessness projects and went into community work where you kind of work on a grassroots level. But I got really interested in psychology and psychotherapy, and I started to read a lot around that, and I decided I wanted to be a therapist. And I actually had a place on Dr. Windy Dryden's MSc at Goldsmiths. Daughter decided to come along, and so I kind of put that on ice and then moved to Manchester. And then when I was in Manchester, I went and did a counselling certificate at the Arden, and then I went and did my diploma with the wonderful, wonderful Pete Sanders at PCCS. He sadly died a few years ago. He was such an inspiration, that man, such an inspiration, and I learned so much from working with him. So I did my diploma in Rogerian counselling, and then I was working as a volunteer with Manchester 8 Crisis. I was really interested in, I'm not interested, I began to understand trauma and abuse and the impact that has on people, on women. We worked with women in the 90s. I think rape crisis centres now work with men as well, but it was just women at the time. And then I got a job at the 42nd Street working as a counsellor, working with young survivors of sexual abuse, and I was there for 8 years. And while I was there, I started doing training in transactional analysis.
I see, yep.
Yeah, and I did 5 years TA training, and I was all set up to take my exams. But in the meantime, I was really thinking, that was when I was really thinking about the role the internet could play in terms of making mental health services more accessible. Because in Manchester at the time, it's pre-tram. We've got the tram system now. It's incredible here. But I mean, we, as a charity at 42nd Street, brilliant organisation, a really good organisation, we were there to serve the whole of Manchester. But because of the transport system being so broken, we weren't really meeting the needs of young people from Wythenshawe and places like that. And it was that got me thinking about the internet and how maybe the internet could break down some of those accessibility issues. My daughter was about 12 at the time, and she was getting into MySpace and exploring all of that. We wouldn't let her have it until she was 14, but her friends were using it, and I thought, and I was reading about the internet, and it was changing the way we were shopping. I thought, it's going to change the way we do everything. We really need to think about delivering mental health services online. But there was very little evidence for that at the time. So when I took the idea to my bosses at 42nd Street, rightly so, they were a bit anxious about that, a bit nervous about doing that. But I'm a very tenacious individual, and the idea wouldn't leave me alone. So I kind of decided to go and do it on my own anyway. So that's how my journey into digital mental health started, really.
That's really fascinating. Just hearing you talk through that thread of, your early years. And I suppose it's that word, isn't it? Curiosity, whether that's curiosity about religion and spirituality or curiosity through the sociology about politics. It sounds like you were trying to find something and understand something about yourself and the world around you that then developed and evolved until you get to that place where you are clearly doing something if I'm right, I think maybe I'm making a little bit of an assumption here, but working in rape crisis, working at 42nd Street, doing something you love and are enjoying, but trying to spot those things that perhaps could be done better in terms of accessibility, and deciding that actually maybe there's something that you personally could do to change that. I think that's the bit where maybe some people are different. Maybe we may notice things that could be done better or gaps, but we don't all then think, I'm going to find out more about whether I can change that. We might moan about it, or we might, hand it as a problem to somebody else. But it sounds like you're saying you're somebody that just takes that on and wants to run with that and try and find ways to resolve that.
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think it's something about finding it difficult to see people suffer in the same old ways and nothing changing. I still find that difficult now. Let's do something about that then, And, my kids sometimes tell me off for it. They say, Mum, we don't want you to fix it. We just want you to listen. But so, yeah, it's, I think it's something about, wanting to do something. Yeah. And I think it's about not accepting poverty, not accepting inequality, not accepting that some things are just rubbish and not fair and unjust. I just can't accept it, and it's, so I'm always driven to try to do things to make a difference, I suppose, to make some small dent. But I don't think it is an ego. I suppose part of it is an ego thing, but I actually quite like working as part of a team. I like being part of a team, and I like hearing other people's ideas. And it's not in a dictatorial way, egotistical way, where I think I've got all the answers. I'm just, what can we do about that? Well, why is that? Those kind of questions, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's, let's face it, civilization has been built on those connections that human beings have been able to make, hasn't it? And sharing knowledge and ideas and resources. So, yeah, as they say, teamwork makes the dream work. And I think you're testament to that, aren't you? So, and really interesting also, Elaine, to hear you talking about those accessibility issues for the young people in particular that you were working with at the time, and you identifying how the internet and how technology may be able to help with that. And you said, your employers at the time were a little bit reticent, a little bit nervous. And we're talking here at the end, towards the end of 2024, and many of us are still very nervous about technology. Some of us are still very nervous about the internet and the evolution of where that technology is taking us. So it's refreshing, and of course, and we all know deep down that there are so many good things it does too. But just to think again how forward thinking you must have been back then, to sort of say, is there an opportunity here? And if there is, what might that look like? So as you were considering that, where did that then start to take you? Because obviously I'm very conscious, and again, our listeners may not be quite so, that, we've got Kooth waiting just down the line for you. So help us understand what that progression then was from just this idea about the internet and what then happened next.
So what happened was I went to see Relate, the charity, and I met with Relate, and I said, look, I've got this idea that we could develop a online counselling service for people. I don't want to do it on my own. Would you be interested in working with me? And she said, well, how much would it cost? And I said, oh, I had no idea. Nobody'd asked me that question, see. And I'm not a techie. I still am not a techie. In fact, my family laugh at me because I find the remote control a little bit challenging at times. But so I don't know, £5,000, just made this figure up on the spot. Of course, this is at the time when there'd been the dot-com bust. There'd been a boom and a bust. And all these investors had thrown all this money at technology, thinking that the internet was going to make them incredibly rich overnight. But I was coming at it from a completely different angle. I was coming from it from the public sector hadn't embraced the internet at all. I think not even every local authority had a website at this time. I mean, this was like back in 2001.
Okay.
So she said, it's going to be too expensive. I went back 2 weeks later. She said, the board have decided it's too expensive. So I thought, oh, this is so annoying. So I went back and I knew in my head what I wanted the website to look like. I knew what I wanted it to do. I knew I wanted it to have a magazine with articles. I knew I wanted it to have direct, for people to talk directly through email to a therapist. So I sketched it out and I got the help of somebody who was a bit of an internet. He'd written an article in one of the internet magazines. I went and saw him. He thought it was a good idea. So I went and borrowed some money from the bank. I got my husband to write me business to do all the statistics, the kind of mathematical bits, the business plan bit. And I went to the bank and borrowed £15,000. Then I borrowed £5,000 from the Building Society, told them I wanted a new kitchen. So I had this 20 grand basically. And I used that to work with a developer to build our first platform. And we got, and I aimed it at men's health actually, because I thought I won't aim it at young people because I can't ask young people to pay for the service. And people came on and people would email us. But what I found was, number one, people weren't willing to pay. And number two, 35% of all of my traffic was young people under the age of 18.
Oh, well, I never.
So I was right. It's a young people. This is, young people like this. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I was working, I've got 3 children. I was working at 42nd Street 3 days a week. And I was coming home and working on this platform and I was exhausted. And I thought, what am I going to do? And then luckily, a friend of mine who I used to work with introduced me to Barbara Swan, who was the chair of the Primary Care Trust. And she invited me in and we had a chat. And she said, I've got a bit of slippage money. We're going through a reorganisation. Would you be willing to maybe do a bit of consultation with kids in school to see whether they actually would use this? So I did. And they said they would, and they helped design it. And then they got some money through the Investor Save budget, which was managed by John Prescott at the time, who was Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And what Stockport wanted to do is they wanted to close down some of their children's homes and to put the money back into prevention. And they asked whether I would develop an online platform to support them in that. And so I did lots of consultation with young people in brilliance, in youth services, in the schools, and we came up with the name Kooth.
Oh, well, I never.
And that's how Kooth was born.
I had no idea
about it, and they loved the idea, and so they bought into it. It was very quick. It happens. So they bought into it. Of course, we were the first public sector, private sector kind of partnership that on the front. We were the first ones in the market, really. So we developed that service. I'm very proud of it, really. It was I still get emails from people saying that their sons or daughters have used it, or they used it as young people. I mean, my daughter was 12 when we launched Kooth, and she's 35 now. So, so I still get people saying it changed their lives, and it's really helped their young people. So it's a nice thing to have done. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. A testament to those
20 years. There for 20 years. After 20 years, I'd brought in some private investment because the technology, we built it using one developer, and it needed like far more investment in terms of the tech. And you can bootstrap so far, but after a while if you really want something to go global, you kind of need to either borrow loads and loads of money, which we weren't brave enough to do, or you need to get sort of private investment, equity investment in, really. Yeah. So that comes with a price. It was a huge price to me personally to do that. Yeah. It wasn't a particularly pleasant experience for me. I mean, the CEO they brought in, Zoe, she's a really good friend of mine now. That worked well, but but it changed my relationship with the company, and I felt I was quite lost. It was quite a grieving period for me in some ways.
That's a really, really good point. And I was just going to say, I mean, all of this is testament to those ideas you have, those opportunities you spot, that tenacity that you said you have. But actually, you're so right. We can't forget that there's another side to these things, particularly when they become successful, and our role in it and our identity and our relationship with those things can change. And when we decide it's time to move on, then, I spend a lot of time sort of talking to my clients about what grief and loss is, because I think, isn't it? It's easy to think that that's about the death of somebody close to you. And I say, but we can grieve houses that we used to live in, neighbours that we used to have, jobs that we used to love, businesses that we used to run. They're all those little griefs and losses, aren't they? So, or larger ones. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's all part of being human, I think.
Absolutely. And so you'd already said much earlier, Elaine, that as you were coming towards the end of your time at Kooth, Zuntold, or what was to become Zuntold, was already an idea that was there composting in your mind. So what about that? What about us now coming back to that conversation that we sort of began right at the beginning of storytelling, of a link between literature and how that might sit in a therapeutic sense with us as human beings. Where does all that come from?
Well, I think sort of, even Freud said that he didn't discover the unconscious. It was writers and artists who discovered it. And it's true. It's true. So I think storytelling in literature is one form of storytelling, is part of being human. We're narrative-driven creatures. We look for stories, we look for connections, we look for meanings in everything we do. And of course, novels and short stories, even novels that are genre-based, they carry that seed with them, don't they? And I think it was, like I said to you when we were corresponding by email, people come to counselling to find their story, to find out who they are, why they feel the way they feel, why things are the way they are, why they're unhappy, why they're distressed. They come to unpick it, make sense of it, move on, to find a new story about themselves. That's why people come to counselling. So the connection, I think, is always very, very strong. And if you look at the 12 stages of the hero's journey, the ordinary world, the call to change, the crossing the threshold, the meeting the mentor, all that stuff happens in the therapeutic relationship, I think. So to me, they are very, very connected. And it was while I was on holiday, I was thinking about bibliotherapy. I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. I read this amazing book by Professor Keith Oatley, who he's a cognitive psychologist based at the University of Toronto, and he wrote this wonderful book called Such Stuff as Dreams: The Psychology of Fiction. And I read that, and it was that reading that book is what gave me the aha moment, really. Okay, we need to put these two things together. We need to put these two things together somehow. So I started to think about how we could take our novel, how we could start selecting novels for our publishing company that had bibliotherapeutic properties to them, that could support young people with their mental health and support them in their storytelling, that could be used as part of their therapy, as part of their, not instead of, as part of their therapy. So it's about, there's two different sorts of bibliotherapy. There's the sort of most people, when they think of bibliotherapy, tend to think of CBT, self-help, sort of manuals, that sort of, and that's got a place. Yeah. And that has got a very strong place. And most of the research has been done on that area of bibliotherapy. But I was looking at poetry and novels, short stories, the creative bibliotherapy. That's what I was interested in. And they're not medical devices, so they're not replacements for therapy, but they are an adjunct. They're a companion. I think that's how we see it in our service. We see literature as being a companion alongside the therapist, really, with the therapist. And it's got a social mission to it as well, because if you look at the picture across the UK, not just the UK but globally, but let's talk about the UK for a minute. If you look at the picture across the UK and you look what's happening with young people and reading is falling off the cliff. So children and young people are reading less.
Mm.
Part of that, ironically, is things like TikTok, is things like this kind of really fast-paced dopamine hits you get from the addictiveness of things like TikTok and scrolling, doom scrolling. It's really not good for our children's brains.
Yeah.
Really, we're doing them a lot of damage, really. They are being damaged by that. Their brain chemistry is being changed.
Mm.
And they're losing the ability to focus and to concentrate. And it's such a shame because stories are so rich. But it's not all hopeless because, ironically, although children are young people, it's actually more once they hit year 7. Once they hit teenage years, little ones, younger children, sort of years 4, 5 and 6 are still reading, as probably not quite as much, but nearly as much. But the teenagers, it's getting less and less. But when you look at the other side of stuff, and this was I think it was the National Literacy Trust. I think it was. I can find the statistics somewhere. The statistics are out there. You can look for them. But I think it was the National Literacy Trust did some research. 26% of teenagers read fiction on their phones.
Okay.
So in some ways, it's not necessarily that they're reading less. They're just reading in a different way. And it's and it's interesting because there's another really good book for listeners who are interested by a writer called Naomi Barron, and it's a really good textbook, and it's called How We Read Now. And she did lots of research with students, mainly sort of like A-level students, university students. And what she said was what she discovered is that kind of print, all the science shows that kind of reading print's better for our brains. We remember more, we retain more knowledge. And that's a problem because a lot of the big publishers are moving away from print because it's more expensive, and they're moving to digital. But what students are reporting back is they like the digital as a companion to the print. And indeed, when I was in school, I was in one of our high schools literally 3 weeks ago talking to a group of young people about this. And I was asking them about their reading and what they like to read and how they like to read. And they said that they like print, but they also really do like reading on screen as well.
Okay.
So I think we're kind of catching up with each other. I think where things are changing, and like, as you know, in any period of big change, you're not quite sure where things are going to land because things are in flux. So
yeah, of course,
it's not all bad news. It's not all bad news. So So I forgot your question. So where are we? So I mean, I'll talk at you for ages. Have I gone off key? Because I could talk about what we.
Not in the slightest. All you're doing is giving me about a million other questions that I'm having to hold on to because there won't be time to ask them all. It's just fascinating hearing you, and I'm just, thinking of my own experiences with my children. They were raised very much. We didn't have a TV when they were little, and so it was all very book and literature focused. But you're so right. They, in the end, we did get a TV, and they hit secondary school age. And they fell out of love with it all. But now in their sort of mid-20s, both are back to being, quite voracious readers. So I wonder whether, and I'm wondering whether this is, you're talking about those statistics and reading falling off a cliff for young people. I wonder whether that's just in Western culture. Is that just here? Is that globally? I'm not asking you necessarily that you would know those answers. I don't know, but it would be interesting. Because you wonder how much is in our school system, which is, there's such a lot, isn't there, for children to have to do all the time.
I think it's pretty much, there may be like 1 or 2% differences, but I think it's pretty much across the world, really.
I see.
What they call the developed world, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's, so I think it's, so there's some interesting challenges, but But the other thing, of course, as well, is the other really interesting thing as well is that sort of like the inequality of it, so that children from poorer backgrounds, they go to school with a deficit of vocabulary in terms of their language, and that they leave school 3 years behind their more affluent peers. So if you think about counselling, you think about when, as counsellors, when we're talking to children, young people in school-based counselling projects, our service is very much school-based and community-based and online. It's a blended model. And it's you think about those young people, you think about the young people that come into the counselling room. They come with all sorts of difficult stories or all sorts of different experiences, and that are shaping them and they're affecting them. And counselling is quite, when we think about counselling, it uses quite sophisticated concepts. You know, we're working with quite sophisticated concepts, and sometimes we might be working with children, young people who just don't have the vocabulary to deal with that. So for me, you know, bibliotherapy has to so it's about choosing the right sorts of texts, and it's about introducing storytelling as part of the work to children and young people who might not necessarily be that comfortable with it or that familiar with it. So that's part of the skill of the therapist, is knowing how to do that. So we're learning that as a team together. We're learning that as a team, how to make that happen. Because I honestly think that we've got a duty as counsellors to introduce storytelling and books and stuff to every single child on the planet. If it's a picture book, it doesn't matter. You're giving them a gift that they can then use, which will support their mental health and support their development. I mean, Oxford University did a big study and showed that reading for children, reading for pleasure, is the biggest indicator of social mobility, far stronger than a child's socioeconomic background, experience. Is
that right?
Massively important that we make books, we introduce books to every child we work with. You know, and it's like that in counselling, isn't it? When young people leave us after counselling, we hope that we have imparted a relational experience which has been nourishing and repairing and healing, but we've also left them with some psychoeducational tools that they can apply to any struggles they may face in future further down the line.
Absolutely.
So is relational, but it's also educative. It's got two parts to it. Therapy is the same. Bibliotherapy essentially is, in a traditional therapy relationship, you have your counsellor, you have your client. In bibliotherapy, you have a piece of literature, and that might be a piece of literature written by a novelist or a poet, or it might be a piece of literature the client's written themselves.
Well,
important part of that as well. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, you've just anticipated my next question, and that was to sort of bring it all back in then and ask you, okay, Elaine, so what exactly are we talking about here in terms of bibliotherapy? Is it reading other stories? Is it writing our own story? And you've just pretty much answered that, and then bringing it into a therapeutic context.
Yes.
Okay.
It's fun. So bibliotherapy has got, in a bibliotherapy, when you use a book or a novel or a story or a poem, you're looking for, there's kind of like 6 steps, if you like, and each step's got like a myriad of little tiny steps. So the first thing you're trying to do, so for example, the first thing you might say to a young person is, you might give them you might choose a piece of fiction, or you might suggest they read something, and usually you would choose it because the language is right, the format's right for them, you've got to know them a little bit. And you might choose a story with a character that's going through something similar to themselves. So it might be the loss of somebody they love, it might be a parental divorce, it might be physical violence. You know, you might choose something but you have to be careful, and obviously you have to think about, is it going to be too triggering? You have to kind of work all that out, and that's where when I say to you that books aren't medical devices in themselves, they're part of a relationship. So but you'll choose a book where a character or situation you think might resonate with that young person, and you might show them a piece of the writing. It might be just a piece of text, or it might be the whole book. And on our platform, all the books are you can read them on your phone or you can read them on a platform. But you can also listen to them if you prefer audio as well. Because when we did young people, they said audio is really important. So we give young people, and what we do is we build in reflections and activities throughout the text, so that we ask young people to reflect on a piece of writing and share it with their therapist or keep it to themselves, because, sometimes you might just want to read a piece of fiction and just work it out yourself without sharing it, and that's completely fine as well. But the first thing you ask a young person when you're reading, you might read it with them, or you might get them to read it in their own time and then talk about it in the next session, is, did you feel like you were there with the character? Did you feel like you were there with the character? And what was that like for you? Does the scene remind you of anything from your own life? Can you describe what it reminded you of? What were the images like? And what that first bibliotherapy step is called building a capacity to respond. So the text has to be able to have within it has to build a capacity within the young person to respond to it. Do you see what I mean? So
of course.
What's your relationship with the text?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first step, and then there's lots of other steps. So it's all about describing images in your own words, bringing your own memory to the images. It's looking at pace, rhythm, texture, noticing how the story moves forwards and doesn't stand still. That's a big therapeutic lesson in itself.
Absolutely.
You might be feeling like this now, but you won't be feeling like it forever. Things don't have to stay the same, sort of thing. And then the other bit is the exercise. The next part is about looking at the characters. What does the character look like to you? How would you describe them? Do you like the character? Do you feel connected to them in some ways? Do you get them? Do you understand them? So it's all about looking at motivation, and that step in bibliotherapy is called identification and involvement. Anyway, there's 6 steps. I won't bore you rigid with all the 6 steps. It's quite a kind of a, it's there's a whole theory around it. It's that we've kind of discovered and built into our books. So.
Oh, Elaine, far from boring. It's absolutely fascinating listening to, the words popping into my, is engaging, creative imagination, insight, you've already used the word yourself, reflection and being reflective on our own experiences, or young person's own experiences. It's a fascinating way of, like you say, doing all those things that we know or we hope counselling and therapy does anyway, but using these stories as a way of engaging and enabling young people to perhaps find that whole process more transformative and I suppose more approachable for them too, while they still have those wonderful creative imaginations that we can lose a little bit as adults, can't we, as time goes on?
They really do. I was talking to one of our counsellors before I came on here this morning, and I said, is there anything that you think I should say about the way we work? And she says, I think the thing that's made a real difference to young people is it's a 12-session model. It's not a 6-session model. It's a 12-session model. So there's more time to build trust and rapport, and there's more time for them to tell their story. And then part of the way we work in our 12-session model is that you create something as part of the sessions. So whether that's a piece of writing or a drawing, that part of the therapy is you create something. And she was saying that, Karen was saying that sort of like when young people leave the room after they've written something, they leave the room 10 feet tall. They sometimes discover that they are creative for the first time, that they are creative beings. So, yeah. So the whole bibliotherapy thing is about discovering other people's writing, but it's also about discovering your own creation, your own creative abilities, I suppose, your own creative potential.
Oh, so that's wonderful.
We work, and we've, like I said, we've got an online program, but all of the young people, whether they speak to one of our online therapists or one of our face-to-face therapists, everybody uses the platform. It's a truly blended sort of experience, really. So, yeah.
And tapping into, as you said earlier, that very shared human experience that we all have within us, and however that is, in to be creative in terms of music or art or storytelling, or it's just part of our DNA, isn't it? Whether we realise that or not, and to be given, I think, as a young person, that opportunity to recognise that they have that within them is healing in itself, I'm sure, is therapeutic in its own right. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
I mean, our dream, Faye, our big goal, if you like, our big, hairy, audacious goal is to be a kind of the place to come for bibliotherapy. So we want to build relationships with other publishers, as well as we publish our own books, but we want to build relationships with other publishers who've got books that we think could be really helpful in this mode of therapy, and to be a place where counsellors and therapists can come to select books that they think could be used with young people, and to be a resource that counsellors can use in their work.
Oh, I see.
As well as delivering services ourselves, we'll always want to deliver our own services as much as possible. But we think that this approach has got such an important role to play. You know, it should take its place alongside art therapy, really.
That's a really good point. It's incredible, isn't it? We know about music as therapy, art therapy, of course, absolutely, play therapy, those sorts of things. It's almost strange that literature and stories, aren't perhaps so widely known or recognised, maybe. So that sounds like this like a library that you're trying to curate. Is that what you mean? And that people can then come in and...
Yeah, we want to carry on publishing as well. So we'll carry on publishing. We've got some amazing new books just coming out this year, and next year we've got some wonderful books coming out. And we want to publish books specifically that counsellors and psychotherapists can use as well. So we published a book in February called The Flying Child, which a cautionary fairy tale for adults, which has just done so well. And that, in some ways, Sophie's story, her relationship with her therapist, in some ways kind of completely sums up the whole approach, really, where she used the fairy story as a vehicle to talk about the child sexual abuse she experienced as a child, and how she was able to use that to connect with her therapist. She connected with her therapist anyway. She had a really good connection with her. But Pat was able to then use that work with Sophie to really help her tell her story. And in some ways, it's testament to the whole approach for me, I think. So I think, so we want to carry on publishing. But yes, ideally, we want to be a place where we want our technology to be available to people who think it could be helpful to them in their work. So we've got some ideas of how we can make that happen. So we're just working that out at the moment. But
and do I remember you said? I'll tell you how I remember this is because it was a phrase I wasn't quite sure I recognised. You used the phrase beta subscribers.
Yes.
Pardon me for being, that I have no idea what that means, but is that what you mean?
Yeah, so basically beta means, like alpha is like, top. Beta means kind of like when you're testing things out, really. So we're about to, and we don't know whether this will work or not. We're working with the public sector. We like working with the public sector. That's what we love, really. And we are working with the NHS. We've got some really exciting things in the pipeline with the NHS, which is really exciting. But we did think about perhaps running an experiment where we had a group where we opened up subscription to people who aren't part of the NHS, who might want to try all the service out to see what they think of it, to give us feedback, because we're growing and reiterating all the time. So we would be interested if there was a handful of counsellors who thought they would like to maybe work with us to sort of test the site out, look at some of our books, see how we're doing things, to see whether it could be useful to the clients they're working with, whether that might be something we could think about, in the future. So, yeah.
I see. So anybody listening to this, that it sparked their imagination and interest, or perhaps obviously people that are familiar with bibliotherapy anyway, you're saying if maybe now or at some point in the future, if they wanted to get in touch, okay.
To build we're building out the model at the moment, so we're not quite ready for people yet, but everybody who's interested wants to stay in touch with me, just for the future. I'd be really interested in hearing from people. Yeah. So
and of course, as you know, as we've done before, we can, you can let us know and we can put that out in, the magazine or whatever, and let members know when you might be ready for some of that. But so it sounds like you're actually in a really good place with Zuntold at the moment in terms of having a better idea of what this actually is, what it looks like, how it works, how effective it is, all of that really important stuff, but also where it's heading and what next as well. So that we really are kind of really keen to deliver bibliotherapy as a service across the country if we can, maybe even further, because we think it's got such a it's such a rich offer, and it's 12 sessions, but it needs to be blended, we wouldn't, I think it's, as an approach, I think it works really well for those young people online who don't want to see a counsellor face to face, but vast majority of young people do want to counsel in person. And so we've built this blended model to kind of reflect that, really, because I think, there's just, it's got such an important role to play, I think, in terms of creative therapies. And we want to help get that off the ground. I mean, one of the third stage in bibliotherapy is, for me, the most magical phase, and it's called building connection to my own story. And that's where the magic, the alchemy takes place, where suddenly this story that they're reading, or this story they're involved in, that's written by an author or might even be another young person that's written about their experience, that you start to think, how young people start to ask that question, or adults, it doesn't have to be young people, it could be adults as well, but how am I different? How am I similar? Why is this character behaving in this way? And what does it say to me? And how has their story impacted me? And what could help that character change? What could help that character? Because really they're thinking about themselves. So it's all about building that connection to my own story. It's to me, it's that's the stage 3. That's where the sweet spot, where the change really starts to occur. So lovely to watch. How is that then? And you talked about work you're doing with the NHS. Is the work that you're doing with the NHS literally everything you've described so far, this 12-session model, and that you are offering that to young people that are being referred into for counselling?
Yeah, so our current contract at the moment is actually not NHS, it's local authority, but it's all tentative. I can't say too much because it's all
okay.
But we're having conversations with.
I'm with you.
Yeah, some really exciting conversations about bibliotherapy too. Yeah, so I might be able to say more about that in 6 months' time.
No, fair enough. Sorry if I over-anticipated that one.
Yeah, it's exciting. So I think it's like I said, and I am not an expert in this. I mean, I feel there'll be people listening probably out there who probably know more than me about this, and we will be, if we win, if things play out, come to fruition, we will be looking for new staff to join us, so who are interested in this space, who might have other things to offer. I mean, it's interesting. I was at this conference on last Saturday. It was the Association of School and Children's Education Librarians. They're called ASSEL, and they had some amazing speakers who were talking about storytelling, who was talking about attachment through literature.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a lot of work that's gone on in the library sector and in the education sector, that the kind of conversations they're having, they really need to be happening in the counselling world as well, because we are so connected, we are so connected. And yet those connections haven't always been brought into the limelight. So if we can play a small part in helping to bring those connections, those conversations together, I think it will be wonderful for the world of counselling and psychotherapy. It will give us another wonderful way of working, both with adult clients and with young people.
Opening a door to that whole library of opportunity that's out there. And it's funny, you just used the word attachment, and what came to my mind when you said that was just thinking of our attachment, for those of us that love reading anyway, our attachment to books as well. And you just all of a sudden brought for me, how I feel as I'm coming towards the end of a book that I love, and you start eking it out a little bit. Or again, that we talked about loss at the beginning, that little sense of loss that you feel when you close that book for the last time. And anybody that knows me will know that I'm very reticent to give any of my books away either. I'm a real keeper of my books. I am a little bit. Yeah. So just the way that those stories have a real place in our hearts, and of course often the authors behind them too. So
some of our authors are so amazing. Like Miriam Halahmy, she wrote this wonderful novel for teenagers called Always Here for You, and it's about online grooming. And the last chapter is Holly's diary, where she's talking to her counsellor about what's happened to her. And it's just, Miriam's not a therapist, but she just really gets what goes on in the counselling room and what the counsellor would need to say to help this young person kind of not blame themselves and not, help them heal. And I think, it's just, we've been so lucky to work with some amazing authors. And I think there's just, like you said, there's just so many good books out there. Yeah. One of my favourites is Midnight Library. It's not one we've published, by Matt Haig. Have you read The Midnight Library?
I have. I've got it on my bookshelf. Yeah.
I love that book. It's all about regret. And that wonderful line he says where, every second we walk into a new universe.
Yeah.
Oh, he's right.
You still, it sounds like, have a love of your own for reading. Are you still that person that will pick up a book, on holiday or of an evening and enjoy? It's not taken the pleasure out of that because of all the work that you do.
I do read a lot of non-fiction. I read a lot of therapy books. I read a lot of books about literature and about bibliotherapy. So I'm reading research papers all the time at the moment. So I do read a lot of non-fiction. But no, I do read. I'm reading a really old book at the moment called oh gosh, I forgot what it's called. It's on my I think it's called, is it Squib? It was by Nina Borden. It's a very old book. It's written in the 1920s. Yeah, and I'm reading that at the moment because somebody recommended it to me. It's a children's book. But of course, because we publish as well, I work with writers. So I have the absolute privilege of working with writers whose nobody else has seen the manuscript yet. We're about to publish it. So I'm always working on manuscripts. So we've got we've just sent one off, Lobster Blues, which is going to be amazing when it comes out. There's another one called Search for the Remarkable in Things. Can't wait to get that book out there. And I'm working with this lovely company, Vista, who have written this wonderful graphic novel about the 7 cosmic powers, and it's all about it's written by one of the authors is a psychologist, and it's about the kind of value. It's about the kind of the 7, if you like, things that children need to develop to help them stay resilient, but it's all told within the story of a graphic novel, and it's beautiful. And that's a book. so yeah, I've got that privilege as well.
I could listen to you, you know, the excitement within you as you talk about these things is wonderful. And it really sounds like then, Elaine, as I mean, we've gone into extra time here. I do apologise. But it sounds like you're really finding your stride. You've really found an identity in Zuntold and a purpose in Zuntold. And it's now about just following that path along and bringing people and books and stories into your own Zuntold universe and continuing to create that. And I think anybody that's been listening to this conversation will understand just why it sounds like it's going to be and is so successful. And that's because of your clear passion about all of this. And, you know, you've used words like audacity and tenacity. And I think that sort of sums you up as an individual and why you really inspire the people, the teams around you to make these things work and benefit the people that then use them.
They inspire me equally as well. I've got some amazing, I mean, my colleague Jan's just a real strength. You know, I've got some amazing colleagues as well. Yeah.
That's really good to hear. Thank you to Elaine for joining me today, and thank you for listening in. If you would like to know more about Zuntold and the resources and books that Elaine mentioned, all the links you'll need are provided in the show notes below. This podcast is brought to you by the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, a professional home for counsellors, psychotherapists, and over 120 wellbeing organisations across the UK. Autonomy, diversity, creativity, and community are at the heart of what we do. We are creating a positive space for conversations with people who share common beliefs and goals, because together our voice is louder. If you would like to know more about the NCPS, please visit www.ncps.com for more information. And please remember to follow and subscribe to this podcast so you are always part of the conversation.